Well, look at you. No. Look at what you just did, because somewhere right now somebody is staring at the evidence of your latest move and trying to understand how the hell you pulled it off. They had a prediction. They had a version of you already written. They thought they knew how your story was supposed to end. And then you did the one thing they never calculated. You changed the script, not politely, not gradually. You ripped the damn thing apart. And now they're sitting there trying to pretend they aren't shocked. Funny. They expected you to follow the timeline they created for you. They expected you to struggle where they thought you'd struggle, fall where they thought you'd fall, disappear when they thought the pressure became too much. But you didn't. You did something far more disturbing. You adapted, you evolved, you became unpredictable, and now they're watching a version of you they don't recognize. That's what happens when someone finally stops living according to other people's expectations. The moment you stop trying to be understood, you became impossible to predict. And unpredictability terrifies people who thought they had you figured out. They knew your old habits, they knew your old fears, they knew what buttons to push, they knew how to make you doubt yourself. They knew exactly how much disrespect you would tolerate before walking away. They knew how easily you used to explain yourself. They knew how badly you wanted approval. They knew, or at least, they thought they knew. Then something happened. You stopped playing the character they were comfortable with, and suddenly, their entire theory collapsed. That's the part nobody talks about. People don't always hate your success. Sometimes they hate the fact that your success proves their prediction was wrong. You were supposed to remain small. You were supposed to stay predictable. You were supposed to need them. You were supposed to come back. You were supposed to apologize. You were supposed to explain. You were supposed to break. Instead, you became the plot twist. The moment they thought was your ending became the scene where everything changed, and now they're watching history happen in real time. Your history. Not because everything is perfect, not because you've reached the final destination, but because you've crossed a line you can't uncross. You finally saw yourself differently. And once that happens, you cannot completely return to the old version. You can pretend, you can try, but somewhere inside you, you have already seen what you're capable of. And that knowledge is dangerous. Because once a person discovers their own power, they become very difficult to control. That's why your silence feels different now. It isn't weakness. It's information they don't have. They don't know what you're planning. They don't know what you're building. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know what you're going to do next. And people become nervous when they can't predict the next move, especially people who became comfortable with your old behavior. They keep waiting for the old you to return. The one who explained, the one who chased, the one who reacted, the one who needed to be understood. But that person isn't driving anymore. Something changed. You changed. And the funny thing is, you didn't even have to announce it. You didn't make a speech. You didn't post a warning. You didn't tell everyone. I'm becoming different. You simply became different. That's why it hit harder. Because announcements can be ignored. Transformation cannot. You can fake confidence with words. You cannot fake it when your behavior changes. You can pretend to be disciplined for a week. You cannot fake consistency for months. You can tell everyone you're moving on. But eventually your life either proves it or exposes you. And yours is beginning to prove it. That's what they're seeing. They're seeing evidence, not promises. Evidence. And evidence is brutal. Because evidence doesn't care about excuses. Evidence doesn't negotiate. Evidence simply exists. You did something they thought you couldn't do. You walked away when they expected you to stay. You remained calm when they expected you to react. You kept moving when they expected you to collapse. You became better when they were waiting for you to become bitter. And that last one, that is what they didn't expect. Because bitterness is predictable, growth isn't. They expected revenge. Instead, you became evolution. They expected anger. Instead, you became focus. They expected you to spend your life proving them wrong. Instead, you became too busy proving yourself right. That's a different kind of power. You don't need to destroy anybody. You don't need to embarrass anybody. You don't need to expose anybody. You simply need to keep becoming someone their old opinions can no longer describe. That's enough. More than enough. Because imagine the psychological discomfort of watching someone you dismissed become undeniable. You remember what they said. They remember what they said too. That's why some people suddenly become quiet. Not because they forgot, because they remember. They remember the laugh, the doubt, the little comment, the look, the moment they assumed you weren't capable. They remember, and now reality is standing in front of them. Reality has a nasty habit of correcting people, and reality doesn't care about pride. You can't argue with results forever. You can't call something impossible after watching it happen. You can't keep calling someone insignificant while the world keeps noticing them. At some point, the lie becomes too expensive to maintain. So what do? They rewrite the story. Oh, I always knew they could do it. I knew they had potential. I was just testing them. I never actually doubted them. Of course. Amazing how quickly history gets rewritten when the ending becomes inconvenient. But let them rewrite it. You don't need to correct them. You don't need to remind them. You don't need to say, I told you so. That's amateur hour. The real flex is not needing the apology. The real flex is reaching a point where their apology doesn't change your day. Their approval doesn't change your confidence. Their jealousy doesn't change your direction. Their attention doesn't change your mission. That's when you know you've escaped. Because the goal was never to make them regret underestimating you. The goal was to become so far removed from their judgment that their opinion becomes background noise. That's freedom. And freedom looks strange to people who are addicted to approval. They don't understand why you aren't reacting. They don't understand why you aren't explaining. They don't understand why you seem calmer. They don't understand why you aren't fighting every battle anymore. Because they haven't realized something. You stopped competing. And that's terrifying. How do you defeat someone who doesn't believe they're in a competition? How do you manipulate someone who no longer needs your validation? How do you control someone who is perfectly comfortable walking away? You can't. And that's why your energy changed. You stopped asking, do they like me? And started asking, does this deserve access to me? That's a completely different question. One comes from insecurity. The other comes from self-respect. And self-respect has consequences. It changes who gets access to your time. It changes what you tolerate. It changes what you chase. It changes what you respond to. It changes what you consider important. And suddenly, people who were used to having unlimited access to you discover there are doors now, locked doors, and they don't have the key. That's when they start wondering what happened. Nothing happened. You simply learned. You learned that attention is currency. You learned that time is non-refundable. You learned that not every argument deserves your voice. You learned that not every person deserves your explanation. You learned that peace is expensive, and you stopped giving it away for free. That's not arrogance, that's evolution. And evolution always looks offensive to people who benefited from the old version of you. Read that again. Some people don't miss you, they miss the access they had to you. There's a difference. They don't miss your presence, they miss your availability. They miss the version of you who answered immediately, who forgave quickly, who accepted less, who tolerated disrespect, who kept returning, and now you're standing there with a different set of rules. No announcement, no warning, just consequences. That's why they can't believe what you just did, because they thought you were emotional. You became strategic. They thought you were desperate. You became selective. They thought you were afraid of losing them. You became comfortable losing anything that costs you yourself. That is the transformation, and it didn't happen overnight. Oh no, they just noticed it overnight. There's a difference. They weren't there for every silent battle. They weren't there when you questioned yourself. They weren't there when you had to rebuild your confidence. They weren't there when you were alone with your thoughts. They weren't there when you had to decide whether you were going to become a victim of what happened to you or the architect of what happens next. They weren't there. But you were. You saw everything, every failure, every humiliation, every disappointment, every moment you almost quit, and somehow you kept going. That's why your confidence feels different now. It wasn't handed to you, it was forged. There is a difference between confidence you borrow from compliments and confidence you build after surviving yourself. The second kind doesn't disappear when somebody insults you. It doesn't collapse when someone leaves. It doesn't need constant applause. It stands there quietly because it has evidence. You've survived. You've adapted. You've learned. You've rebuilt. So now when somebody says, "You can't," a part of you almost laughs. Not because you're arrogant, because you've heard that sentence before and you're still here. You've heard impossible, you've heard unrealistic, you've heard crazy, you've heard too much, you've heard not yet, you've heard you're not ready, you've heard you should quit. You've heard all of it. And somehow, those words became fuel. They thought they were throwing stones. You were collecting building material. That's the joke. They were trying to damage your confidence. You were learning what resistance feels like. They were trying to make you feel small. You were discovering how much pressure you could survive. They were trying to end the story. You were learning how to write the next chapter. And now, they have a problem. The person they underestimated is becoming the person they have to account for. That's a different feeling. You can see it, the hesitation, the recalculation, the strange politeness, the sudden interest, the questions. What are you doing now? Whoa. What's next? How did you do that? Where are you going? Funny, they weren't asking when you were struggling. Now they suddenly want the blueprint. But here's the secret. There is no blueprint they can steal, because your greatest advantage was never the strategy. It was the identity behind the strategy. You became someone who refuses to stop. That's difficult to copy. They can copy your words, your clothes, your style, your routine, your aesthetic, your confidence. They can imitate the surface, but they cannot download your scars. They cannot borrow your memories. They cannot inherit your nights. They cannot duplicate the pain that taught you. They cannot manufacture the hunger that came from being underestimated. That's yours. And that's why imitation will always look slightly empty, because the energy behind the action matters. Anyone can look confident. Few people can remain confident when nobody is watching. Anyone can talk about discipline. Few people practice it when there is no reward. Anyone can talk about being different. Few people are willing to be misunderstood. And that's what you finally became willing to do. You became willing to be misunderstood. That is freedom. Because once you stop needing everyone to understand you, you can finally build the life you actually want. You can take risks. You can change direction. You can say no. You can walk away. You can start over. You can disappear for a while. You can build without announcing, and you can come back with something nobody expected. That's what makes your story dangerous. There is still more. They haven't seen the next version. That's the part they should be worried about. They're reacting to what you've already done. You're thinking about what's next. They are studying the last move. You're already making another one. They are looking backward. You're moving forward. That difference creates distance, and distance changes everything. Because eventually, the people who doubted you won't even understand how far you've gone. They'll look up one day and realize you are no longer standing where they left you. You're somewhere else. Different environment, different mindset, different standards, different life. And they'll wonder when it happened. Again, quietly. That's how real transformation works. It doesn't always make noise while it's happening. Sometimes it looks like disappearing. Sometimes it looks like isolation. Sometimes it looks like saying no. Sometimes it looks like starting from zero. Sometimes it looks like nobody understanding you. But underneath all of that, something is forming. A new identity, a new standard, a new level of tolerance for discomfort, a new relationship with failure, a new relationship with yourself. And when that identity becomes stronger than your old habits, your life changes. Not because the universe suddenly became kinder, because you became harder to derail. That's the real victory. You didn't make life easier. You made yourself stronger. And now pressure doesn't destroy you the way it used to. Pressure reveals you. Chaos doesn't scare you. It activates you. Rejection doesn't end you. It redirects you. Failure doesn't define you. It educates you. Silence doesn't frighten you. It gives you room to think. And loneliness, sometimes loneliness becomes the laboratory where your strongest ideas are created. That's why you shouldn't always run from isolation. Sometimes you need distance from noise to hear yourself again. Everybody wants access to your attention. Very few people care what that attention is costing you. So protect it, because your attention determines your direction. Where your attention goes, your life follows. And if you're constantly staring at people who doubt you, you're still giving them power. Stop. Look forward. The best revenge isn't watching them watch you. It's forgetting to check whether they're watching. That's when you've really won, because now you're no longer performing for an audience. You're building for yourself. And suddenly, everything becomes lighter. You don't need the perfect response. You don't need the perfect comeback. You don't need the perfect explanation. You need movement, action, execution. That's the language reality understands. You can talk about what you're going to do for years. One result can end the argument. That's why execution is terrifying. Because execution removes ambiguity. People can argue with your intention. They can question your motivation. They can mock your dream. But once the result exists, what are they going to argue with? Reality? Good luck. Let them debate your character. You build the evidence. Let them question your ability. You produce the result. Let them underestimate you. You keep moving. And eventually, the conversation changes. Not because you demanded respect, because your presence requires it. That's what making history looks like. Not everybody cheering, not everybody understanding, but reality shifting because you refuse to remain the person they expected. You are not here to fit into somebody else's prediction. You are here to destroy the prediction. You are here to prove that a person can change their trajectory. You can change your identity. You can change your standards. You can change your future. And when you do, some people will celebrate. Some will disappear, some will pretend, some will criticize, some will become obsessed. It doesn't matter. The audience is not the assignment. The transformation is. So stop checking who noticed. Stop checking who is impressed. Stop checking who regrets. Stop checking who is jealous. Stop checking who is talking. You're wasting energy. The real question is, what are you becoming? Because if you're serious, you don't have time to monitor spectators. You have a future to build. And futures don't build themselves. They require sacrifice. They require uncomfortable decisions. They require days where you feel like nothing is happening. They require moments where you keep going without evidence. That is where most people disappear. They need immediate proof. You don't. You understand something now. Seeds don't look like forests. Beginnings don't look like endings. Preparation doesn't look like success. And silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. Sometimes silence is where everything is happening. That's why you should never confuse invisibility with irrelevance. Some of the most important things in your life are happening where nobody can see. Your discipline, your thoughts, your standards, your decisions, your identity. And one day, the invisible becomes visible. Then people call it sudden. They say, "Wow, you changed so fast." No. You changed where they couldn't see you. That's why they are shocked. They missed the construction. Now they're staring at the building, and they can't understand where it came from. It came from every day you refused to quit, every time you chose the harder option, every time you stopped yourself from going backward, every time you chose your future over your comfort. That's what they're looking at now, the architecture of your persistence. And maybe that's why your energy feels different, because you aren't pretending anymore. You're not trying to look powerful. You're becoming powerful. You're not trying to look mysterious. You're simply private. You're not trying to look confident. You're finally trusting yourself. You're not trying to look independent. You learned how to stand alone. There's a difference between performing an identity and becoming one, and you are becoming. That's why they can't believe it, because they thought you were temporary, but you're becoming permanent. They thought the change was a phase. It wasn't. It was a transition. They thought you were reacting to pain. You were responding to reality. They thought you were angry. You were awakening. And now, there is no going back. Because once you understand how much of your life was controlled by fear, you can't unsee it. Once you understand how much energy you gave to people who never deserved it, you can't unknow it. Once you understand that you don't need permission, you stop asking. That's the moment your life becomes dangerous, the moment you stop asking. Not because you stop caring about others, because you start caring about your own direction. You realize something brutally simple. Nobody is coming to live your life for you. Nobody is going to make the decision. Nobody is going to build the dream. Nobody is going to protect every hour that's yours. And once you accept that, you stop waiting. You start moving. That's the shift from waiting to creating, from reacting to deciding, from explaining to executing, from hoping to building. And that's why the people watching you feel something they can't name, because they are witnessing a person who has stopped asking the world for permission to exist at full volume. You are no longer shrinking. You are no longer negotiating your potential. You are no longer apologizing for ambition. You are no longer making yourself smaller so somebody else can feel bigger. You are not here to make comfortable people comfortable. You are here to become fully yourself. And that will offend some people. Let it. Growth has always offended people who benefited from your limitations. Read that again. If your growth makes someone uncomfortable, ask yourself why. Maybe they preferred you weaker. Maybe they preferred you available. Maybe they preferred you confused. Maybe your new boundaries exposed their old expectations. That's not your emergency. You don't need to return to the old version of yourself just because someone misses their access to it. Keep the door closed. Keep walking. Because you are not making history by repeating yourself. You make history by becoming something the previous version of you couldn't imagine. And that's exactly what is happening. The story isn't finished. That's the most important part. Don't mistake the current chapter for the final scene. You have more to build, more to learn, more to become, more to prove. But not to them, to yourself. That's the only audience that matters now. And maybe that's why the energy around you feels strange, Because something is shifting, your standards are rising, your tolerance is shrinking, your focus is sharpening, your excuses are disappearing. And when those four things happen together, people notice. Your old environment starts feeling too small. Old conversations start sounding repetitive. Old habits start feeling embarrassing. Old goals start feeling insufficient. That's growth. It doesn't always feel exciting. Sometimes it feels lonely. Sometimes it feels like you're losing pieces of yourself. But you're not losing yourself. You're losing what no longer fits. That's different. And the Joker in you understands something most people don't. You don't have to destroy the entire world. Sometimes you just need to stop obeying the rules that were never designed for you. You don't need chaos for the sake of chaos. You need freedom. You need the freedom to move differently, think differently, build differently, respond differently. And that's exactly what makes you dangerous. Not cruelty, not anger, not revenge, unpredictability. Because nobody can control a person who knows their own mind. They can pressure you, but you decide. They can tempt you, but you decide. They can insult you, but you decide. They can leave, but you decide what happens next. That is power, choice. You have the ability to choose your response. And once you master that, people lose their ability to control your emotional state. They can throw the match. You don't have to become the fire. They can create chaos. You don't have to become chaos. You can watch. You can think. You can choose. And then move. That's what makes calmness dangerous. Calmness means you are no longer reacting automatically. You are calculating, you are observing, you are deciding, and people can feel the difference. That's why the room changes when someone truly confident walks into it. They aren't demanding attention. They don't need to. Their certainty creates gravity, and you're beginning to understand that. You don't need to be the loudest person. You need to be the most certain about your direction. That's enough. So let them wonder. Let them speculate. Let them create stories about you. You don't need to correct every story. Your life will eventually tell the truth. And truth doesn't need a marketing campaign. It simply arrives. One day, the people who thought you were lucky will realize how many times you kept going when luck wasn't there. The people who thought you changed overnight will realize how many silent years built the change. The people who thought you were arrogant will realize you were simply done apologizing for existing. The people who thought you were finished will realize they were watching the beginning. And the people who laughed, they'll remember, not because you reminded them, because reality did. That's the sweetest part. You don't have to punish anybody. You don't have to chase revenge. You don't have to become bitter, just keep going. Let your life become the answer. Let your consistency become the argument. Let your results become the final sentence. And when you finally reach the level you once thought was impossible, don't become obsessed with the people who doubted you. That would be giving them another victory. Instead, look forward, because the next level is already calling. That's the trap nobody warns you about. You can become addicted to proving people wrong. Don't. Proving people wrong is temporary fuel. Purpose is sustainable. Revenge burns fast. Legacy burns forever. So don't build your life around hatred. Build it around hunger. Don't build around their failure. Build around your evolution. Don't make them the center of your story. Make yourself the center of your mission. That's when the Joker smile becomes different, not evil, not bitter, just amused, because you finally understand the joke. The people who tried to control your story were never holding the pen. You were, and now you're writing something they can't edit. Every decision is another sentence. Every risk is another paragraph. Every failure is another plot twist. Every comeback is another chapter. And the ending, nobody knows it yet. Not them, or not me, not even you. That's what makes it beautiful. The story is still moving. The future is still unwritten. And you are still dangerous with a blank page. So don't stop now, not after everything, not when you finally learned how powerful you can become, not when the old version of you is already behind you. Keep moving, keep building, keep surprising them. But most importantly, keep surprising yourself. Do something tomorrow that today's version of you thinks is impossible. Then do it again, then again, until impossible becomes routine, until discipline becomes identity, until confidence becomes normal, until silence becomes strength, until your presence becomes undeniable. That's how history happens, not in one giant explosion, but through thousands of decisions nobody noticed, until suddenly everyone notices. And when they do, don't explain, don't celebrate too early, don't turn around, just smile, because they finally understand what you knew all along. You were never trying to become somebody else. You were becoming impossible to stop. And that's why they can't believe what you just did. That's why the room feels different. That's why the conversation changed. That's why people who ignored you are suddenly watching. That's why people who doubted you are suddenly curious. That's why your silence is louder now, because you didn't just make progress. You changed the expectation, you changed the equation, you changed the trajectory, you changed yourself. And once you change yourself, everything around you eventually has to adjust. So let them adjust, let them stare, let them whisper, let them wonder, let them rewrite their opinions. You have no time to manage their emotions. You have a future to build. And the most dangerous thing about your future, they haven't seen it yet. They've only seen the beginning. They think this is the peak. It's not. They think this is the final form. It isn't. They think they finally understand you. That's adorable, because you are still changing, still learning, still building, still evolving. And the person you become next might make the current version of you look like the beginning. So keep going, make the next move, then another, then another. Don't announce it, don't explain it, don't ask permission, execute. Because when you make history in real time, the people watching don't get to choose the headline. Your actions do. And eventually, they will have no choice but to write it. Not because you demanded recognition, because you became impossible to ignore. You didn't chase the spotlight. You became the reason it moved. You didn't ask to be remembered. You became unforgettable. You didn't destroy the narrative. You became the new narrative. And when they finally look back, they won't remember every word you said. They'll remember what happened after you stopped listening to the people who said you couldn't. They'll remember the moment the prediction failed, the moment the old identity collapsed, the moment the underestimated person became undeniable, the moment you stopped asking for permission and started making history. And that's the moment you're standing in right now. So don't blink, don't go backward, don't become distracted by the noise. The story is moving, and this time, you are writing it, not them, you. And the funniest part, they still have no idea what's coming next.